Hi everybody. Thanks for coming out to the jam, to the VR Create-athon, and thanks for coming to my talk. I hope everyone's having a really nice time so far. I am Samantha Kalman, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what to expect from prototyping today. I have a background at Unity. I was at Unity for about 5 years, and I was at Amazon for about 1.5 years working on the Fire Phone. And in between those positions and now, I have done some independent game development. So this is me at the Game Developers Conference 2 years ago, demoing a game at the Indie Mega booth at GDC called Centris. Centris has been my main project for the last couple of years. It shipped in August. It was an early access. It was a Kickstarter. It was like the whole indie circuit. And it is this super experimental puzzle game, as you can see, this thing about circles, but it's also an abstract puzzle game about making music. So sort of the way that I work is learning and experimenting and iterating through prototyping. So to give you an example of that, this is what the finished game looks like, pretty much. You got this circle, you've got a bunch of different things, you've got a couple different sections, you've got like these outer rings, you've got this inner thing with this scaffolding, you've got this honeycomb thing in the middle, there's these honeycombs here, and it's all very confusing to look at, and part of the game experience is trying it out and learning what's going on while you're playing it. And of course there's a tutorial, but because it's about making music, there's a lot that I want people to discover themselves. And so finding the right balance. So a similar scope of problem to VR is exploring new territory. VR is very new territory, and Centris was also exploring some pretty unexplored territory. And so we're trying to solve the same sort of problems and learn the same sorts of things. To put this in perspective, this is the finished game, and this is the first prototype. So it looks pretty different. And I knew very little about the domain, like the problems that I was going to be solving. I had a game design in mind, but I had no idea if it was going to work. So part of what we're doing with prototyping and what we're doing today with VR prototypes is learning. So this was a prototype. This actually took me about a week to build, including one woman doing all the assets, doing the code and the design, and also planning the test, like defining the scope of the prototype. So you can get a pretty good sense of where it started and where it began. So I wanted to set everyone's expectations that because we have these huge ideas about what we want to do and the experiences and the interactions and the designs that we want to make, we would probably really only have time today to reach something like this. And that's okay, because with time and effort, you can take it forward into something that looks nicer and is full of more learnings. I compare it to, I compare these things as products, right? Like I grew up playing video arcade machines, and people started making their own machines at home using computers and emulation and hardware. So on the left we have a prototype of an arcade cabinet, and on the right we have a finished product of an arcade cabinet. And I just kind of love this juxtaposition because they're both kind of functionally the same, but they're so different. And the quality is different, and again, just to set everyone's expectations, we're doing one-day prototypes. So let's aim for something that's more like this, and not beat up ourselves if we don't make the fully nice, polished thing. This is a graphic called, it's supposed to illustrate design thinking. You have an idea, you want to test out the idea, so you build a thing, and then you put it in front of people, they try it, they play it, they talk about it, you're learning, and you're learning from their experience, and that feeds back into new ideas. So this entire cycle, if we can get through, and each of you can get through this cycle once today, that will be a huge win. Because throughout development of projects, you're going through this process constantly. And then when you're ready to ship and call it a product, that's when this cycle ends and you sort of work on polish and finishing, fit and finish, those kinds of things. But really, I promote learning as much as possible and having new ideas constantly. But every step in the cycle is important. So having the idea, manifesting the idea, we're always trying to bring what we build as close to the idea as possible, but it's always a little bit of a gap, and that's okay too. But understanding, again, through testing and feedback, super, super important. So if you can build something, as soon as you have something playable and you're ready to learn something, just ask someone else at the jam if they'll try it out, watch what they do, listen to what they say, and then ask them about it. And that will help you learn more about what you're doing and what your players and what the people experiencing your stuff are going through, what they're taking away. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the latest work that I've been doing in VR. So there's going to be more abstraction and sort of like a little bit higher level concepts. So these are some suggestions to things to think about throughout the rest of the day. So I consider myself an artist that programs, and oh, this is really hard to see. I wish I could turn up the brightness. It's a kind of shape here, and then there's a brighter kind of tunnel in the background. This idea of presence. So like in my current work, I'm making this game that's all about wireframes and existing inside a wireframe world. So what does that mean? Presence is this sense of transportation where you put on the headset and you forget that you're looking at a screen through goggles. You feel like you have been transported from where you're standing into another world, a parallel dimension. And that world can be anything. Thank you. That world can be anything, and it can take any shape and it can have any rules. It doesn't have to conform to the rules of this world. And that creates a huge affordance for experimentation and creativity. So presence is this idea that you exist somewhere else, that your brain forgets that you're not here, you're in the world that you're seeing. These slides are all from the same project I'm working on. This is called Project Red. The rules of the world can change. The rules do not have to conform to what we have here. Your world doesn't need gravity, right? Your world doesn't need a social structure. Or if it has a social structure, it doesn't have to be anything that's like this world's social structure. In the fall, I was able to attend a talk that talked a lot about values, about how we manifest our values, our personal values in code. And so take virtual reality with the sense of presence and the sense of creating rules as an opportunity to build a world that reflects your values, whatever those are. Also, there are other, if you've been looking at VR so far, then you've probably become aware of some best practices or some rules of VR. Things like instant velocity or teleportation, like you're not supposed to do this because it will make people sick. Well, in filmmaking, there are other rules. And in film school, they teach you the rules and why the rules are there. But then they teach you what you're doing if you break those rules. So you can break any of the rules of VR, but knowing what breaking the rules will do is important to keep in mind. So just because Google says you have to use an instant velocity switch, you can't use acceleration, doesn't mean you can't use acceleration. There's this sense of optical illusion, which I really love about VR and in particular wireframe rendering. This is going to get a little bit high concept for a moment, but bear with me. So when you're looking at a screen, it's made up of pixels, and when you're using wireframe rendering, the optical illusion that emerges, specifically for wires, is that every wire is exactly 1 pixel in width, no matter how far away it is. So if I took a piece of string, something equivalent to 1 pixel in this world, and I stood very far away, that string would get smaller and smaller. In VR and in wireframe rendering, that doesn't happen. So you don't actually, this world does not conform to the rules of perspective that this world does. And I think that's really cool and exciting. So, and I know it kind of goes there, but like, I just want everyone to go there. So take that in mind. Proprioception is the sense of our body and our position, where our limbs are, how we're oriented. This interface here, which is in this screenshot, is actually representing mathematically your rotation of your head. So this picture was taken from basically an angle of looking like this. And it's hard to come across in 2D because, again, it's not in VR, it's not surrounding you, but proprioception is really, really powerful, and Vive utilizes proprioception in some really amazing ways. So try to learn about that and see what we can do with it. And those are my suggestions for best practices. And really, I just want to inspire everyone to create something amazing and break the rules and make your own rules and let your mind go as much as possible. But also keep in mind that it's just one day. So just go for it. Thank you.
Woo! Sam's going to take 1 or 2 questions if you guys have any questions really quickly, and then we're going to turn it over to Keith.
Questions? Yes?
When you're prototyping, do you ever create physical prototypes for your...
When I'm prototyping, do I ever create physical prototypes? I have done that, but I have this weird thing where I'm faster at typing code than I am using scissors and tape. I don't know, just I'm not good with my hands in that way, so I find I'm slower with physical prototypes. I do encourage physical prototyping.
And then I guess to follow that, what would you suggest to people who don't have coding skills in terms of prototyping efficiently?
What would I suggest for people who don't have coding skills to prototype efficiently? I think that actually physical prototyping is really, really useful in that regard. Visual things, even if you have an idea of how a system could work, even just trying to sketch that out in almost more of an engineering way that's not code, here's this object and it relates to this object, and I'm doing this, I'm failing to come up with an example, but almost like an org chart in a company, here's how these relationships work, visualizing relationships, clay, working with sculpting, drawings, mood pieces, storytelling. These are all great ways to prototype. Another thing you can try is playing other games and then picking and choosing what you like and having discussions with your teammates about okay, Job Simulator does this cool thing really well, and they only went this far with it. What if we took that part further, and what could that be? One more question? Yes, Kat?
You talked a lot about rules and how you can create your own rules in the spaces that you're building. Do you think about those rules ahead of time, or do they sort of emerge as you're working on new projects?
Rules of the world. Do I think about the rules of the world ahead of time, or do I come up with them along the way? Both. The project that I showed you was actually started in a rebellious act of Google's best practice of instant velocity change. I started that project because I wanted to explore the extents of drifting and with drifting in VR, drifting through a different dimension. And I wanted to try to prove to myself that it could be done that it wasn't as much of a problem as they said. So it started with that, and then the line rendering thing and the perspective rules sort of happened. It's something that I noticed and wanted to double down on. And I think that's part of creativity is having a starting point and then going forward with it, and then being open to what you learn as you go. So if you notice a thing that you didn't plan on, give that thing extra attention because that might be a spark. Okay, thank you. Have a great summer prototyping.
The next talk is from actually my co-founder from Tomorrow Today Labs, Keith, is going to talk about Newton VR, which is a physics plugin that we built.